Hey everyone, welcome to session 61 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I'm joined today by Dr. Nick Weatherly of the Florida Institute of Technology, and we delve into a few areas of organizational behavior management, namely the coaching of staff members in public school settings, as well as the ethical considerations of OBM interventions, I should say. In our conversation, Nick fielded numerous excellent lists of questions having to do with topics like pay for performance, how to get good training and supervision in OBM, and book recommendations for BCBAs who are looking to learn more in this area. We talk about the writing process in general as well, and in doing so, I kind of tipped my hand a little bit and talked about the book that Dr. Lisa Britton and I are writing on supervision. You may remember Lisa from session 29, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in some episodes down the road here. But Nick is the author of the forthcoming book, Deliberate Coaching, which he co-wrote with Dr. Paul Gavoni. So we get into how he wrote that book, why he wrote it, and things along those lines. But he also was very gracious and, kind of deflected from his book and actually mentioned a ton of other resources and books and things like that for those who want to learn more about OBM. You can find all of those at behavioralobservations.com, session 61. And that is a good rundown there. That'll give you all the links and things like that to the resources that he mentioned. So real quickly, this podcast episode is sponsored by Constellations Behavioral Services. They're looking for outstanding staff members in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Clinical Behavior Analysis, the leading ABA provider in the state of Kentucky, and HRIC of Colorado, bringing 30 years of recruiting experience to help BCBAs find their dream job. And then two quick conference notes. I'll be at the Hoosier ABA conference in October. I'll be doing a live podcast interviewing Dr. Matt Norman. That should be a lot of fun. And I'll also be at the New Hampshire ABA conference coming up on September 22nd. Now, there may be a few extra tickets that have been recently made available. It has been sold out for a couple of weeks, but they've done some room rearrangements and figured out that there may be a few seats that are now become available. So if you're hearing this and you're on the fence, you're going to want to snap those up because those extra tickets are going to go really fast. So anyway, I hope to see you either in Manchester, New Hampshire, or Indianapolis, Indiana. And I think that's pretty much it for announcements here. So without any further delay, let's enjoy this fun conversation with Dr. Nick Weatherly.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Nick Weatherly, welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure, and thank you for playing hurt. I understand you're nursing a little bit of a cold here, so but you're soldiering on nonetheless. So I really appreciate it. Very cool. So let's jump right into this. So you're a Western Michigan guy, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into behavior analysis and things like that. I know many of people who have gone through Kalamazoo and have had similar experiences. Tell us a little bit about your background as it relates to encountering behavior analysis.
I would like to think that I was such a spry and on my game high school student that I selected Western Michigan because of the behavior analysis emphasis, but I didn't. I was actually slated to go to Michigan State. I had my dorm room, and about 2 weeks before the start of the semester in the fall, a good friend of mine, Matt O'Neill, he owns a real estate company in South Carolina now. He contacted me and said, come out to Western. It's really cool out here. And then I went out there, talked to a few people, and just immediately switched over and went to Western. I was a psych major, so it was purely accidental. I was a psych major because I liked, kind of probably a classic thing. I want to work with people and so on and so forth. My psychology teacher in high school said that it's 1999, man. People don't do one area of psychology anymore. Get with the times. Everyone's eclectic. There's no such thing as like a humanist. There's no such thing as a behaviorist. And so I didn't know what I was getting into. I knew I didn't want to do kind of like, stereotypical kind of pop psychology stuff that I would see on TV. So I didn't know really what I wanted to do. Thought maybe I would go pre-med. So I did some work at hospitals, and then I took an undergrad, my first behavior analysis class, took an undergrad ABA class with Jim Carr. He was at Western at the time. And then I was like, okay, I really dig this. I see what people are getting at now. Like there's a science behind this, and it was really starting to kind of scratch that itch. It was simplifying things for me, and that, you can talk about things objectively. And then I took essentially an intro to OBM class with John Austin. He was there. And then I said, okay, this is it. I want to do what Jim was talking about in the intro to behavior analysis, which essentially was our research methods class at the time. And then I want to do it in the settings that John's talking about. And then that was it. I started dabbling in that, trying to figure out kind of what I wanted to do. Did some kind of small performance management projects for like Practica. And then decided that that was it. I wanted to do apply the science of behavior to business. Didn't know what type of business, so I started kind of exploring different types of business from there throughout the rest of my graduate career.
So when you were an undergraduate, and you mentioned some small performance management projects, what sort of things were available? I just want to pick your brain on this, because there might be undergraduates are listening to this now who are maybe thinking of doing some stuff. So what kind of stuff did you get into and what was available to you as an undergraduate to get your feet wet in?
What I thought was pretty neat is there were kind of two different avenues. So Dick Malott had a practicum, or kind of a project for undergrads. I didn't do it as an undergrad, but the idea was there was a structured curriculum, and there were certain sites that they had worked at before. Like we had worked at Olive Garden, had worked at 7-Eleven, or so on and so forth. So they were WMU friendly. So then a student would go in there and essentially identify a business problem and kind of do a small intervention to improve behavior to impact that business problem, so on and so forth. What John had us do, which I thought was a really good learning experience, was he just straight up had us like cold call. We took a safety class with John, and we took and then in his undergraduate class, and it was just find a site, preferably not one that you work at, but if you need to use one that you work at, that's fine. So I was a cook through undergrad and grad school, so I did it at a restaurant. And because I felt comfortable there. That's what I went to places I felt comfortable. I went to places that I felt like I could speak their language. So my first couple projects were one at a restaurant, and talking about closing tasks and safety and some of the things that people encounter at the restaurant. And then the first safety one was an assessment in an injection molding shop, a plastic shop, because my dad has been in injection molding his whole life, so my whole life. So I was comfortable there. I was comfortable in those manufacturing settings. So I started off just cold calling those type of places.
Did you learn anything from that cold calling experience more generally in terms of how to approach people, how to explain what you're doing in layman's terms and things like that? Was that a formative experience for you, or was it just kind of like, I can imagine myself, as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid going, there's this thing called behavior. So I think I would be terrible at it personally, but
I was pretty bad at it. It was one of those, you don't want to lead with, my old man works in plastic, so can I come work in your shop? I get what you do,
right.
Because I don't really get exactly what you do. It really helped me feel like you're a cocky undergrad, and it really makes you realize that you don't know as much as you think you know when you're trying to show the value of the science. You're around, especially at Western Michigan, as the first behavior analysis program. So you're around people who are already sold and bought into behavior analysis. So it was a good learning experience. I think the thing that I took away, what I took away from that the most, I think, was that you can get people to talk about their problems, and then you have to try to help them find the value in a scientific approach to fixing those problems, a behavior analytic way to fixing those problems. And that's what I do today as a consultant and as a researcher. It's the exact same system, but sitting down at a shop or at a restaurant or with some sort of manager and just saying, tell me a little bit about, what's working and why you think it's working, and a little bit about some of the improvement efforts that you're focusing on, and then you can get people going. People will jump to the solutions, essentially the functions that, Jill's doing this because she's lazy, and Rick's doing this because he's just, waiting to retire, or so on and so forth. But once it's a good experience to help get to the heart of, just give me some metrics so I can find some behaviors, and I can find out why those behaviors are occurring, and then now I can start, rocking here. So it was a good experience.
Clinical Behavior Analysis, or CBA for short, is Kentucky's expert provider of applied behavior analysis, counseling, and direct support services to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, acquired brain injury, and autism. And they're about to open the Center for Behavior Analysis, a 13,000 square foot state-of-the-art facility in Louisville, Kentucky. And they're looking for a clinical director to lead a highly motivated team of BCBAs and technicians. If you're not familiar with Louisville, it's been rated by U.S. News & World Report as one of the nation's best places to live. With a low cost of living, your industry-leading salary and signing bonus will go a lot further. And with an abundance of cultural and recreational activities, you will not lack for fun things to do. So to learn more, go to cbacares.com/careers and set up your confidential interview today. So you're at Western, you're doing some fun stuff or some interesting work, maybe both, as an undergraduate. Sounds obviously like you made the decision to go to graduate school, and if I'm not mistaken, you went right through Western the whole way, right? Yep.
I stayed there through my master's degree and my PhD. I thought about going to a different university for my PhD, but I worked with Dick Malott at the time, and he didn't have any doc students, and all of his doc students were graduating. So he allowed me to kind of work with him on developing kind of a plan of action to get me some experience with program instruction, get me some safety experience, and speaking with a lot of my advisors there at the time at Western. There were so many people there that I needed to learn from. I needed to learn about application and safety from John Austin. I needed to learn about systems and pay for performance systems and kind of the state of our field from Alice Dickinson. It was just a good, ripe place for me to be. So it was nice. I had a very collaborative master's and PhD learning experience. So I decided to stay there throughout the whole way.
All right. So it sounds like you had this really cool experience in graduate school. And so how did you ply your trade once you were done with your dissertation?
So once I was done with my dissertation, I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I think like many doc students, I thought I knew more than I actually did. So I was tempted to, jump right into academia and start, doing some research or, teaching people the wealth of information that I had acquired. And then I realized, maybe I need to acquire some more information. As an OBMer, my focus was on application. I wasn't a big theory person. I didn't do a lot of EAB work. So the interventions that I was focusing on needed to actually be able to impact consumers. And I realized that I hadn't really spent a lot of time getting to know the consumers of our science in OBM. So I felt that if I did jump headfirst too much into academia, I might just be like regurgitating the research that I was doing as a doc student, or kind of mimicking the research somebody else was doing. And that path really wasn't for me. So I did some university teaching. I was consulting a lot on the side on my own, mainly in manufacturing and in healthcare and some clinical settings. And then I eventually went full time with Aubrey Daniels International, which I think was a tremendous learning experience, because it helped me really kind of relearn some things and really show where I had some deficits in my skill set, my repertoire.
What would be an example of something like that you learned from working, and just for folks who are perhaps newer to the program? We had Aubrey Daniels on, I think about a year ago, and to this day, it's one of the more popular episodes, and he was fantastic. So, anywho, so tell us a little bit about some of the aha moments or things along those lines that you discovered from working with ADI.
I think there was one initial one. So I worked with Tom Spencer, the CEO of ADI now. He's the COO when I got there. He's one of, if not the brightest and best people in OBM that I've been lucky enough to be around. Had and still has a tremendous influence on my career. I worked a lot with him, and I remember, going full time consulting. He would talk a lot about, in this business now, this isn't work on the side. This is, you've got to use the science to make an impact, and they have to like you while you do it, or they're going to go some other place. There are tons and tons of consultants out there, and all of them are peddling their own way of doing things, of ways to make improvements in those businesses. So if you don't get those results using the science of behavior, and they don't like you while you do it, they can't relate to you, you're just not going to work here, because you're not going to make any money here, and you're not going to be of value. So you're going to get fired. It's going to be, pretty cut and dry. And that was, I enjoyed that reality check of it, because it was, this stuff needs to work. This isn't just, me talking to a bunch of students, or me talking to a bunch of people who are new to behavior analysis, and they kind of listen to me because I'm their professor. You really need to have an impact, and it's not, there's a gap between, there has been, and there still is a gap between OBM research and practice. And I think a lot of that gap is because we don't always really understand the needs of the consumer. A lot of our experiments in OBM are conducted by behavior analysts, and we focus more on kind of maintenance of the behavior change and less on ensuring that the managers and the people on site are actually continuing to do those interventions. How many plant managers do you know that are fluent enough in Excel to rock a weekly graph to grasp performance feedback, which is why safety systems do well with kind of, more low key tracking systems for, site champions and safety champions. So that gap, being able to go there and realizing that, not all of the things that I've been studying will actually work in business. We can't get people to do a lot of these things. And what's realistic? How can I sell them on the science of behavior so that they pick this approach versus another approach? We want them picking an approach that is pro employees, that doesn't try to just focus on cutting the bottom line by doing some practices that kind of ignore the value of the employee. We want them to focus on the employee. So that was a big learning experience of how to use the research, how to use the science that we have in a way that will actually sustain in business. And Aubrey and Tom Spencer are two people that really have a firm grasp on the science and the practice, and that's that's not always common in OBM for the good and bad of it.
What were some lessons that you found helpful in terms of getting? I'm kind of stuck on that. They have to like you piece. That sounds, So are there specific things that you took away from your experience at ADI that, in terms of helping you develop rapport quickly with stakeholders, that you can share?
Yeah, I think there's one part of it that, we talk a lot about in behavior analysis about, using lay terms and so on and so forth. And that's, that's important, but there is I think you do have to do your homework on the industry to know, what's acceptable and what isn't, to know what their needs are, both when you're in the selling phase and when you're, delivering. I think there's a level of respect that you have to show. That one of the fun parts about OBM for me is that you can go into any industry and make an impact. But going in there knowing that, you're an expert in this area, you're an expert in banking, we're experts in the science of behavior. So, help us take our expertise and your expertise and move forward to hit results that are of value to you. So being able to talk about things that are important to them, to really respect and understand their industry, to know what part of the science to talk about when, and to realize that you're not going in there trying to get everybody to rock a Skinner t-shirt. You're trying to get them. They might not even know the words behavior analysis. You want them to go see the value of a behavior analytic approach to improving their business needs, because there are 5 other consulting companies that are competing for the same job. And I think that was a good learning experience of what to say, when to say it, how to talk about data, how to focus on the data. Nobody cares that I have a PhD. They want to see that I have results, and that I have some experience.
So basically, find out what's important to them, speak in a language that they can understand, and don't try to convert people to behaviorism writ large.
Yes.
Cool. I think that's stuff we can all relate to. And I could definitely see the parallels to that in the kind of K through 12 universe that I travel in, and we can get into that in just a minute. Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you are ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed. So you were at ADI, and now you're at the Florida Institute of Technology. How'd you end up there?
So I worked on the APBA Board of Directors, Association of Professional Behavior Analysts, for about 8 years now. I worked with Jose Martinez Diaz, who's the head of the school out here at Florida Tech. And so he told me about a position opening, and I thought maybe one day I would get back into academia, because I do enjoy research. I enjoy working with students. I think the field needs more OBMers to help build our science and send students in the in a good direction. Hopefully I can do that, or at least I'll try. And so Jose talked to me about it, and it was a good opportunity. They're building a lot of OBM here. Dave Wilder has helped build a lot of OBM out here. And so it was a good opportunity to come here and to take some doc students and some master students and to really build OBM in Melbourne. And we're doing that. We're building a new OBM program, an enhanced OBM program with a lot of new courses, a lot of good practicum and field work experience, with an emphasis on getting OBMers to still have a path to board certification for a number of reasons. So it was an appealing offer. So my wife and my daughter and I moved down to the beach.
Very nice. You had a nice segue there with a path to certification. So that was very clever, Nick. I applaud that. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today is, as you said earlier, nobody cares in industry if you have a PhD. They're probably just looking at solving that problem, addressing that pain point, to use the businessy term, right? So who cares if people are certified as OBMers? So how would you address that question? It's like, I don't, what's the relevance there? Or if someone's interested in the OBM, should they bother with going ahead and getting board certified?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's there's I think one of the arguments about should OBMers get board certified has often been related to the job market, and that argument is completely valid. The job market historically hasn't required a BCBA for OBMers, so it's a lot of work to go through to get board certified if your job in OBM isn't going to require it. If you're going to be working for, Kellogg or Ford or something like that, they don't know what the BCBA is. It's not going to be a job requirement. You're selling yourself and your skills based on how behavior analysis, how your approach can impact, can fulfill the job needs. Now, there are some people who are getting more and more opportunities for OBM in human service settings, senior leadership positions. In human service settings, so then the BCBA has value, but the job market issue is a good one. For me, the main reason that when I first acquired it for aversive control reasons, I couldn't graduate. They wouldn't let me graduate if I didn't get my BCBA. There's a lot of OBMers who are like that, and then at the time, I was going to let it lapse because I didn't need it for the job market. And then I did a little bit of Jerry Shook came and visited Western a couple times, and it was a great experience. And at the time I said, you know what? He's worked really hard to get certification for our field to help protect our right to practice. So I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep it, and I'm just going to keep at it, and kind of out of respect for the certification and the work that Jerry and them did for the certification. And then over the years, we started building more. The regulation of behavior analysis started increasing. I got involved with APBA. I chaired a licensure board in Kentucky. It was one of, if not the first, standalone licensure boards in behavior analysis. And the BCBA helped get me a seat at the table. People in our field, regulation is tied to a lot of autism billing and autism regulation, insurance reform, and that is tied to the BCBA. So they're looking for BCBAs. So the BCBA helped me get a seat at the table. Not that other good, competent OBMers couldn't, if they didn't have it, but it helped me personally get a seat at the table. And then so there's that part of it, and then there's another part of it that there are some states that if you want to practice OBM, you have to be licensed. You have to be licensed in Kentucky to practice OBM. It's not exempt under their licensure law. And as far as I know, and I checked with Gina Green and Suzanne Letzo and a few others, you have to be licensed in Connecticut to practice OBM. In order to be licensed, you need a BCBA. So you can kind of skirt around, assuming that no one's going to report you, but you're like a kid driving on the backwoods of the country at 14, just crossing your fingers that no one's going to bust you. Because if you get busted, you're practicing without a license. And you need a BCBA. It's written into those laws. You need a BCBA to practice in those states. So there are a number of aspects. I think it's good to have an ethics code attached to your practice. I think there's value in that. But the main contingency jobs, no one's going to hire you really just because you have a BCBA. But those are the reasons that I encourage people to get it if you're an OBMer.
Well, since you brought up ethics, what are some of the ethical concerns that you've seen as both a practitioner and an academic in the realm of OBM?
Yeah, I think one, I don't know if it's really an ethical issue, but I think I spend a lot of time and do a lot of workshops trying to help people apply the ethics code to OBM with the understanding that all facets of the ethics code apply to behavioral services, and behavioral services as defined in the ethics code by the BACB includes training and consultation and supervision. So once somebody gets bumped from a frontline clinician, for example, to a frontline supervisor or a mid manager, now their use of reinforcement, their use of assessments, their use of least restrictive alternatives, and so on and so forth, all the things in the code are applicable to their OBM day-to-day duties. So I first and foremost try to make people aware that OBM does have an ethics code. Even if you're not certified, it's the BACB's code. A lot of years have been spent putting that code together by a lot of good people. So I try to get people to, that's kind of the first place I try to send new managers who are behavior analysts, is if you want to look at your scope of competence, look at the ethics code and see which of those areas you feel comfortable with that, within the ethics code and the task list. So that's one thing that I try to focus on. And then, ultimately, a lot of ethical infractions, I think, in business come from an too strong of an emphasis on the bottom line. Is you're focused solely on how to impact the results and not how you impact those results. And that's behavior analysts are just as guilty of doing that as other industries. And that's a path to cutting corners. That's a path to either allowing or directly or indirectly allowing unethical things to occur just because you're focused on you got to get those billable hours in, or you got to hit these certain revenue metrics. So I think that's a big one.
I love it. I love my job. My name's Alyssa, and I work for Constellation's Behavioral Services. I love my job because I feel like I'm making a difference in children's lives. I think the most exciting piece of the job is really knowing that you're going to be able to help people who are really desperately seeking out support. When I'm interviewing someone, I get really excited when people say, I know I don't have all the answers yet, but I'm really excited to make change in kids' lives. I want to research, I want to learn, I want support, I want feedback, I want to see where this field is going. Awesome. So I would say someone coming into Constellations needs to be passionate, excited, willing to learn, willing to grow, and willing to come along for the ride.
For more information about job opportunities in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, visit constellationsbehavioral.com/careers. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, and I want to talk about a book that you've written. And so if you can just remind me in particular, what the name of the book is, and we can talk a little bit about what it's about and so on.
Yeah, thanks. So a colleague of mine, Paul Gavani, we are kind of in a similar boat for you. It's due to our publisher next week or the end of this month, a book called Deliberate Coaching. It's with a publisher called Learning Sciences International. And the premise of the book is applying coaching systems to kind of educational settings, essentially K through 12. So it's designed for school leadership. It's designed for principals or vice principals, or if schools actually have performance coaches, school psychologists, anybody who's responsible for the performance of the teachers, to give them some tips and tools to accelerate the performance of the teacher, and more importantly, build a sustainable infrastructure of support through continuous coaching. So yeah, we're excited. It should come out around January, and we hope people will like it. It's primarily designed for a non-behavioral audience, but we hope everybody will dig it.
So thus far, you've talked about working, at ADI and industries and things like that. So what caused that shift to emphasizing your practice as it relates to supporting folks in K through 12 settings?
Yeah, I've had clients in schools for probably 10, 12 years or so, intermittently, either through program development or consultation. Early on, I would get called, for example, to give, do professional development days for teachers, or there'd be some sort of, something bad would happen at the school, and they would want a consultant to come in and give a training, because, of course, it's always assumed everything is a training problem. They did something bad because the teacher didn't know better, not because there were other things. Obviously, that's not always the case, but historically, it's easy to have to blame everything on training issues. So I've always done that. I had some consulting clients at ADI. So I've always appreciated education. The thing that gravitated me to education, I think the most, has been that if you don't have summer school, then you have a short amount of time to really impact that, like, third grader or 10th grader, and you got to think that, the beginning of the school year starts, you have a little bit of adjustment period. And we had to deal with this with consulting contracts and the timeline of when can you actually go there and start working with it, because it would be, all right, well, how about the beginning of the year? Well, it's the first few weeks of school, things are a little rowdy. All right, what about right here? Well, we're getting close to a break there. Okay, what about this? Okay, so you have these few weeks here, then we're prepping for an examination period, and then we have winter break. Same thing with spring. Adjustment period to get started, spring breaks coming up, and the next thing you know, you're prepping for final exams in summer. So you have a finite amount of time to really get a lot of learning, and in a way that will retain over the summer break if there's no summer school. So the same thing is with teacher performance, and you're trying to build and shape performance, show teachers the value of these new behaviors that you want of them in a very busy environment. They're very overworked. They have a lot of things to do, and they're doing what they're currently doing because it works. So if you want to make some sort of improvements in their performance to impact classroom outcomes, you don't have a lot of time. So it's something I've always been passionate about, and I really respect the things that educators do and the people that work with educators, because it's not it's not easy.
Yeah, my wife is a high school English teacher, and we're recording this right now in late August, and she's back doing their professional development before the kids come in and things like that. And anyone who's spent any time in an educational setting, like particularly in public school settings, will know that oftentimes that teachers are being asked to do stuff that may or may not fit in with, or at least they're being trained on things that may or may not be relevant to what they're doing in their everyday classroom. And I get, at least in terms of my experience, both hearing what goes on at our local schools, and as well as being a school consultant myself, there's always some sort of new initiative going on, right? Whether it's some sort of school culture intervention, or a new type of online platform for grading and et cetera. The big thing now is competency-based education, and how is that going to work, and things like that. So I have a lot of empathy for teachers, particularly in the context of someone, like a behavior analyst coming in and say, hey, you know what? Let me tell you how this will work better, So what sort of ways have you, from a coaching perspective, found that are helpful to, teach new skills, or, bring about new practices without really causing that reflex of overwhelm that is very, very common amongst K through 12 educators?
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point about all the different initiatives that they have, especially the start of the year, where it's like, all right, we're fresh, let's go. And one of the things that I enjoy about consulting in the time that I've been a consultant has been how often, especially in a larger business, you're just the flavor of the month. You go in there and they're like, somebody that looked just like you, maybe a taller, better looking version of you was here like 2 months ago, man. And they said the exact same thing. And then you come in here and you're preaching X, Y, and Z. Now we're supposed to do it your way and do all these other things. So you're exactly right. If you can't make an impact, you are just the flavor of the month. So the things that that we try to focus on is trying to understand what is of value to the teachers, day-to-day life, their day-to-day routine, what makes their job, what can make their job easier, what currently makes their job harder, and try to start with those to show teachers that if you make a couple small tweaks, and now did you notice how easy Wednesday's transition was? Did you see how Wednesday's transition was a little bit easier because of the things that you did there? And getting the teacher to talk about the things that they did differently to make a certain problem go away through the coaching experience. Try to focus a little bit more on that. There are student outcomes. There's there are disruptions in problem behaviors. There's learning outcomes. There's so many other things to focus on, and we start there. We want to make sure that we have those kind of lagging metrics in mind. But trying to find the like natural consequences that occur all the time with the teacher that is of value to them to make their life a little bit easier, and we try to link coaching to those, so that way they're like, this works and this is making my life easier. It's not just, it's helping the student, it's helping the school and all those things, and they want all those things. but we also need to show them the value of it in their day-to-day life. So, I try to emphasize that a lot, build habits that way.
Is there a go-to intervention? You mentioned transitions or other type of behavioral interventions, say for like classroom disruption or whatever you're trying to accomplish that you find works particularly well, that can get that really quick return on investment to basically make the teachers fans of your service?
That's a good question. The main thing that we try to emphasize when working with the coaches is getting them to justify what they're recommending to the teacher. So, for example, I worked with a school a few years ago that everything was fixed by like side-by-side modeling. So, teacher, there's a poor student performance. Coach would go in the classroom and model to the teacher what they're supposed to be doing. When we observed, the teacher could model that almost all the time, but they would still always fix it with side-by-side modeling for the teacher. When getting the coaches to kind of ask more why questions and get to really find out, why is this happening? Because there are some times that it is a materials issue. Sometimes it is just a prompting issue. Sometimes it is a training issue. You do have to, train the teacher on certain things. Teaching the teachers how to appropriately redirect. I think so. It's kind of hard for me to put my finger on a teacher intervention for a student, but giving the coaches the tools for how to justify the solution that they're selecting to use. I think that's something that can have a significant, fast impact. And then you can give the teachers the tips. This is an issue right here where you just need to redirect. We spend a lot of time on getting teachers to increase learning opportunities. Because teachers will say, or coaches will say that, or principals will say that students look bored or they're just not engaged, so on and so forth. And when they're not engaged, they get into stuff. So helping teachers get students engaged, we spend a lot of time on that. But those are some of the things that we might start with.
I see. And when you're referring to coaches, and this may manifest itself in different settings differently, but are you talking about school personnel who are there to support teachers, or is it part of the consulting operation? If you can kind of help me imagine the kind of organization of this intervention, that would be great.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I think when we're talking about coaches, I primarily am focusing on internal personnel. You have outside consultants, come in there, but, trying to focus on what internal folks are responsible for the teacher performance, because they're the ones that actually have to continue doing everything that we recommend. If we're there, unless we're there implementing a product like a software system or something that can sustain by itself, then if we don't get the school personnel to do the things that we're recommending, if we go in there and do it for them, then we're just kind of putting a Band-Aid on it. So focusing on some schools, it's just like the principal, the counselors, the vice principal, anyone who might be designated for the teacher assignments, sometimes school psychologists. There are some districts that I've worked at that because of performance problems, they have a history. So the district actually has some funding for district coaches, people that they actually call district coaches, and there might be 3 or 4 coaches who are responsible for going around all the district, and they're responsible for helping to kind of shape teacher performance and build an infrastructure around that. So it varies a little bit. So
when you say shaping teacher performance, it reminds me of one of the things I want to ask you, which is this: in public school settings, at least here in the United States, and I'm just kind of speaking to my own observations, practicing mainly in the kind of Northeast, the tools we have are fairly limited. And obviously there's no you can't do pay for performance. There's not a lot of differential reinforcement that we can use to shape behavior, if you will, at least from a monetary standpoint. And that might beg a different question about what is a reinforcer and reinforcer efficacy and things like that. But that aside for a minute, so you can't differentially reinforce your high performers, your high performance teachers and things like that. And at the same time, for a bunch of reasons that we probably don't have time to get into, but that's nonetheless relevant. There's very little on the consequence side, or I should say the punishment side or the deceleration side. So it's very, very difficult to provide any type of disciplinary action with in public school settings, and of course would want to make sure that those are the last resorts anyway. Would exhaust positive alternatives and things like that, but. I think anyone, just really cutting to the chase here, anyone who's hung around public schools knows that there are any principal at any moment in time could think of a number of low-performing teachers in their building that they wish they could get rid of, but are nonetheless, still there, still teaching, still working with kids every day, maybe recalcitrant in terms of wanting to learn new things, implement new practices, and things like that. So. Long story short, the tools we have are limited as agents of change, if you will, in public school settings, perhaps unlike those that are available in other industries. So, what have you seen that's been effective given those very limited management tools?
Yeah, that's a good question, and you paint a really good picture, a good accurate picture of school climate and the climate of a lot of businesses, I think.
And let me just say, I don't mean that to be. I'm not painting a picture of all teachers are like this. Again, my wife's a teacher, all our friends are teachers, and things like that.
Yes.
The large majority of teachers. Enjoy what they do. They try hard. They want to learn new things, So I would just want to emphasize that before people start firing up their email and sending in some emails that But at the same time, we have to be realistic too. And then there are serious teachers who exhibit performance problems that you just can't get rid of, and we're nonetheless working with kids every day.
No, you're right, and I think what I took away from the picture that you're painting was more along the lines of a school leaders and the climate of school leadership. They have a lot of people they have to manage. They have a lot of faculty and staff and in turn students and parents that they're responsible for, and again there's only so many hours in the day, so it's very you can't blame them for being reactive in their approach, but from the flip side, getting them to acknowledge that do the teachers only see you when something is bad? When they screw up, is that really when they're only seeing you? Because that's not a good thing. That means that you're really pairing yourself with something bad, and they're only going to work hard enough not to see you, if that's the main contingency that's responsible for kind of keeping their behavior at a good level. So ultimately, what we want is within the parameters of the school. We want to make sure that good things happen when the teachers do the things that the leadership or say that this is best practice. Teachers should be doing this. We know that if they do this, you're going to get those outcomes. We want teachers to do those things. When teachers do those things, we want good things to happen. When teachers don't do those things, we want to make sure that they can see the value of changing their behavior and doing those things. So spending a lot of time of, kind of, we talk about the gap between research and practice, making sure that if you're going to recommend something, that it fits within the parameters for how can a principal and maybe a vice principal and a handful of school leaders actually do this, knowing that, like you said, you bring up a great point. You don't often have a pay for performance system. You're limited in the kind of tangible type of reinforcers that you might be able to provide. You can't, give people a bunch of time off, contingent on good performance. So that's why we try to make sure that we can focus on teachers. I think are very dedicated to their craft, and there are things that make a day good for them, and we try to get people find what makes, just because it's free and it's immediate and it happens all the time. So those are powerful consequences that we have to play with. Find what makes a day good for a teacher and see if you can make that happen for them more. Through the changes in the performance that you're trying to focus on. So those are some of the things that we try to start with, and in essence, just if they only see the principle of something's bad, intermittently go in there and acknowledge something that they're doing well, and try to make sure that when the leader is doing that they are being specific. They're not just complimenting the fact that nobody's screaming in their classroom right now. So
I see. Good point. And do you use a particular interview tool or anything like that to kind of get at what makes a day good and conversely what makes a day not so great and so forth?
We have some coaching questions. There are a lot of people that have books on coaching questions. There's one that's called Coaching for Performance by John Whitmore that has a ton of coaching questions in there. Joe Leipel's book, Rapid Change, has good coaching questions in there. The idea of getting coaches to just ask more questions, to just do more asking than telling, get people to talk more about their behavior and kind of what makes them tick. So we try to start there, and then we get people to just kind of go and just say, hey, I saw Johnny did really well. Let's talk. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you did to get Johnny to do that? Because you obviously did something great. Let's talk a little bit about what you did to do that, and get people, if they seem in good spirits and they're really jovial and they're having a good day, ask them, why their day is going so well and, what you can do to help, and just get them to have more coaching conversations, but quick conversations. Because if these are long feedback sessions, no one's going to do them. It's not going to last. In order to shape the behavior, that means that you need consistency. The only way to get consistency in these constraints in these settings are to have quick, frequent interaction. So those are some of the things that we try to start with.
All right, so that's Coaching for Performance and Rapid Change. Those are two books that you mentioned. We can put links to those in the show notes at behavioralobservations.com. I've got a bunch of listener questions here. But before we turn to that, is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of your work in the K through 12 setting? No, I just, I appreciate the work that people like you and your wife do in school. So I just if people are listening to this and have any, my lab at Florida Tech focuses on trying to get to develop tools that consumers will use long term, and we want to really be able to impact education. So any tips or questions or feedback that you have for us, please email me. My email address is nweatherly@fit.edu, and my website is nickweatherly.com, nicweatherly.com. So send me anything that we can do to help. Awesome. And we'll definitely put that in the notes for this program as well. All right, cool. So let's take some listener questions here. I've got a handful of them, and let's see. Jason Simmons, who's on the podcast not too long ago with clinical behavior analysis in Kentucky, has a few questions for you here. Yes. Do you find that Abernathy's method for pay for performance, the kind of method that he describes in The Sins of Wages, is it too involved for some service agencies to implement, especially for direct support staff? And he continues here. We've noticed that when used, staff typically don't connect their behavior to the incentives because, one, they may not understand the calculations of how that works, and two, it tends to be delayed. So I guess perhaps your comments on pay for performance, and then perhaps more specifically in the human services setting.
I think that's a good question. Jason and his CBA team are doing great things. I'm doing some work with Jason and his team, and they really, I think they're always asking good questions to try to find a way to, kind of practice what they're preaching in terms of, using the science for service delivery and for management. So I appreciate the question. I think, for those of you that, might not be as familiar with Bill Abernathy's work, he, essentially, is our guru for performance metrics and scorecards. We owe a great deal as a field to the tools and methodology that Bill provided. I think one way that I like to look at it, and Jason brings up a good point. There's a lot of pay-for-performance systems and scorecard systems that fall apart because of the administration piece. And I think there are a number of different ways that you can score performance. There are a number of ways that you can take those data and link it to incentive systems. Bill offers a lot of options for that. But I think, to Jason's point, a critical piece here is that internal staff have to be able to administer this consistently and easily. A priority is to make sure that that if there's too much response effort, it's going to fall through especially if you're solely using the scorecard system as a link to incentive system. That incentive system is way too delayed and not powerful enough by itself to combat the amount of response effort that it's going to take if you kind of ignore that feature. So anything that you can do, there are performance matrices that you can design that are very well organized, that have goals. There are some systems that essentially you set the goals each month, for example, and it's more of a binary system where it's you set the goal and did they meet that goal or not? You get a percentage, then you link that percentage to a payout. I would just encourage people to kind of take the information that's out there from Bill and some of his colleagues that are building off of that, and find something that your staff can do consistently based on your data collection capabilities and your payout capabilities. And then I think an important piece is you spend all this time building this database and getting these data, and you link it to a payout, which is good, which is important. But I think it's a critical piece to train and coach your leaders on how to use those data, because if not, you're just missing a just key opportunity. Having managers have access to objective data on performance is just awesome. And if you can teach managers what to do with those data, I think you could have a really powerful system.
Cool. So we got a question from another Jason Stauffer. I have a question for Dr. Weatherly. For behavior analysts working in therapeutic settings such as home, centers, or school-based, how much of an understanding of OBM procedures and strategies should they have? Since most BCBAs will find themselves filling supervisory and staff management positions, should familiarity with and competency in implementing OBM procedures be required as part of our training?
Yeah, Jason, that's an awesome question. And I really appreciate that question, because that is something that I'm very passionate about. And As a lot of your listeners might know, APBA and the BACB have put out a couple employment surveys, and the data show that a lot of, and might say the majority of behavior analysts out there are supervising people in one way, shape, or form, or providing trainings to people, providing consultation to people. And if you just kind of follow the master's degree in our field is essentially our terminal degree. That's our main degree in behavior analysis. That's why you can get licensed with a master's degree in behavior analysis. So the vast majority of BCBAs, we'll just take BCBAs because that was part of Jason's question. A lot of the vast majority of BCBAs are going to start at the frontline level, and they're going to be so good at what they do that they're going to get promoted, and they're going to be now responsible for creating more people to do what they were so good at. That's kind of the nature of the applied part of clinical practice. Is you start at the front line and you're eventually going to work your way up. Once you're responsible for getting results through other people, now you're an OBM person. Now what your day-to-day behavioral services is OBM. So you're no longer directly responsible for the results of that client. You're indirectly responsible for the results of that client. You're directly responsible for the results of the clinician who is working with that client. So I think that's an important piece there. So what he was saying about for people who are filling supervisory roles, I think they should be very familiar with OBM procedures. I think the vast majority of their CEs should come through OBM CEs. I do think it should be a required component, but I think the pieces that should be required are more, just getting them to start tackling some of the basis, the basics. So I'm not spending a lot of time on let's discuss transitive motivating operations in OBM. Let's instead focus on just can you find reinforcers for your staff? How frequently do you can you have interactions with your staff? What do those interactions look like? How do you provide feedback? How do you know that what they're doing is correct? Do you have pinpointed results that you can link to their pinpointed behaviors? And do you know why their behaviors are occurring, for the good and the bad? Start at the basic foundational level. Once you have all that done, then you can start playing around with process maps and TPS and all these other tools that we have that are extremely valuable. But if you are a first day on the job manager, you need to be able to shape the behavior of your direct report, and so you focus on the fundamentals of behavior. So that's what I think should be required.
I see, and it is a larger point of emphasis in the 5th edition task list. So BCBAs to be will be having that as part of their preparation as well. So great. So Celia Heyman, who always writes in with great questions, sends in a couple here. Let's see. So, Nick, with your background, I would imagine that you would find the addition of supervision, staff performance, and other areas of OBM on the 5th edition task list to be pretty exciting and of great importance and relevance to our field. As verified course sequences are being updated to reflect this change in many schools, can you comment or recommend textbooks you particularly like that will support this content? Great question, Celia. Thanks.
Yeah, that is great. That's a great question. I think I want to emphasize to go back to if you're a new behavior analyst and you're getting into OBM, I recommend start with the BACB task list and the ethics code, and let that kind of guide your professional development and kind of areas for growth. That's a good tool for self-evaluation. In terms of text, if you're not a behavior analyst and you want to give somebody something to kind of show them the application of the science, I don't think you can really do better than Aubrey's Bringing Out the Best in People. That's gotten so many people, non-behavioral folks, interested in the science of behavior. But if you are a behavior analyst, 3 texts that I recommend. One is Aubrey's Performance Management text. It's in its 5th edition now.
I have the 1989 version. So
Yeah, right on.
I got that when I was my first semester at Auburn, taking a class from Bill Hopkins, who is I think of a similar generation as Aubrey. So that is
Of
a
course.
classic.
Yep, and it's a classic, and it's still it's a little bit more advanced in bringing out the best in people, but it's a perfect it's the best starter text out there for performance management,
And it's so accessible too.
Yes.
At least the version I have. It's even if you are not a sciencey type of person, you could still read it, and it's written and plainly enough to really get at it. So.
Yes, no, you're exactly right, and it's at ADI they use it with their managers and some of their leadership training. People can grasp it. So that's a perfect starter book. I always recommend the Rapid Change book that I mentioned earlier, and I recommend that book because it's a book on coaching, because it's a book on the performance management book. Will give you will help you apply the science to business problems, help you talk about antecedents in a different way, consequences in a different way, measurement in a different way, finding reinforcers, things like that. The Rapid Change book is it's not designed for behavior analysts. It's written by a behavior analyst, a really good behavior analyst named Joe Leipel. And the Rapid Change book is a great book on building a coaching system within your organization that is set up for consistency and support, to make sure that you can get managers and leaders in the organization focused on their leadership, focused on their coaching, talking about their coaching, supporting each other in their coaching. That is it's a quick read. It's a tremendous coaching book. I highly recommend that if you're a leader. And then lastly, I always recommend Maria Malot's Paradox book, Paradox of Organizational Change. That's a tremendous systems analysis book. The way that she breaks down business needs is really impressive. The way that she walks through systems tools is really impressive. So I think those are three good starting texts.
Excellent. Celia's got another question here. Before becoming a behavior analyst, I was a management consultant for financial companies and capital markets, focusing on total quality management, process reengineering, and systems development lifecycle. Do students of behavior analysis who want to go into OBM, do they need to learn this stuff if they want to practice, in those areas? And I'm kind of paraphrasing her question a little bit, but that's the gist of it from what I gather.
Yeah, I think Celia is really on to something. I think first and foremost, if you can study the market that you're working toward, and study the things that they actually value and the type of processes and procedures and certifications that actually pay attention to, and if you can, the more you can link your approach to what they're used to, the better. Behavior analysts do that a lot with lean systems, and I think that's a good habit for people to get into. So I agree with her. As she said, I think it's just a general knowledge. You don't need to be fluent in it. You don't need to be a master in it. But if you just have a general knowledge, a general level of respect for the processes in which they work, so I think that's a good thing to do.
I have a friend of mine who works in manufacturing, and he's always talking, yeah, we got our 8:30 stand-up lean meeting, and he goes right into the jargon. It's really kind of funny. Sounds like something out of Office Space.
It is.
All right. Cool. Thanks, Celia. Let's see. Maggie Pavone. Questions for Dr. Wedley. What are your top 3 texts or resources for? Okay, I think we probably just covered those. What would you suggest students do to prepare themselves to enter less traditional areas of the field, such as OBM coaching and training? What skills do you think are most essential for OBM consultants that might be missed in traditional BCBA prep education programs? Well, I think the obvious answer is they should go to FIT, right, and work with you in your lab. That kind of
right on.
So Maggie, there you go. I hope you like Florida. No, I'm just kidding.
Get a good tan.
That's right. But wear sunscreen. So yeah, I mean, taking your question more seriously here, if you get someone who wants to go into OBM and perhaps work in industry and things like that, they are a BCBA. Let's say they're currently working with individuals with developmental disabilities. They want to kind of make that transition. And Maggie, I realize I'm kind of maybe transforming your question here a little bit, but I'm just for the purposes of testing Nick here, see how well he thinks on his feet. What would you what advice would you give to someone who is looking to kind of make that jump?
I think the first thing is John Baker and Linda LeBlanc and a few other people wrote a really good article on expanding your consumer base. I think it's in Behavior Analysis and Practice. It's a tremendous article. I can send it over, Matt. I give you the reference for it. But it's a beautifully done article on if you want to get into an area that you may not have as much experience in. They give kind of a nice procedure to follow in terms of how to acquire certain knowledge, how to get some supervision, how to get some experience, networking, and so on and so forth, just to make sure that from a kind of scope of competence perspective that you can feel confident that I've got this. I'm going to go into OBM, and what do I need to do to kind of get into those areas? If you are a practicing behavior analyst and you're not going back to school, I would highly recommend that article because it'll give you some good tips. For some things, if you're interested in consulting, I think a couple things. One is to make sure that you're spending a lot of time reading the text that your market reads. The magazines and the articles and the journals, if you will, the books that your market reads is a big one. A lot of those will give you ideas of the trends in business, the things that you have to be prepared for. So that's one. And a big thing, just specific to consulting, and if you want to go into, for example, build your own business, sales and business marketing is something that a lot of behavior analysts don't spend a lot of time on. Behavior analysts don't spend a lot of time on. And Joe Leipold has a book on precision selling. There are a bunch of sales books out there, the Challenger Sale and other books. But spending some time on the challenges of selling the science of behavior, so that way you can actually get a client and you can actually go there and show them the impact of behavior analysis. I think marketing, identifying your scope, being able to market what you do, and being able to sell what you do, I think are big areas to focus on if you're interested. And then after that, you're delivering. So then you're doing your assessments and your trainings, and those are things that might be more in your wheelhouse.
I'm running out of space on this notebook page that I'm writing on, so but we will nonetheless get all this information into the show notes. So this is good stuff, Nick. Okay, last listener question from Lisa Lawler. I am very happy to see that you listed K through 12 educators into the talk. I am a BCBA who teaches a self-contained class of high school students on the spectrum. I will have 6 paraprofessionals in my classroom next year. Can you provide suggestions for managing my staff? Thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. 6 paras. Lisa, you got your hands full. You're gonna have a good time. I think one main suggestion I have is that the fundamental kind of premise of applying the science of behavior to leadership is that if you take the performance of your paras, you have to start with identifying the metrics that are important to your classroom. You always start with identifying the metrics to make sure that when you talk about the behaviors that lead to those metrics, that you have the right behaviors. You don't want to spend all these time focusing on behaviors and then you're looking at classroom outcomes and other things that are important to you and realize that you're not moving those metrics. You're focusing on the wrong behaviors of the paras. Out of respect for your classroom, I always like to work with teachers and school leaders on that process. What's important to you? What's important to the family? What's important to each individual kid? Identify those metrics and find the behaviors that link to those metrics. Once you identify the behaviors, I think a good takeaway, a foundation of OBM is you have for everything that you want the parents to do, you always have a competing undesired behavior. So a para is doing something that you don't want, for example, because it works, because there are antecedents that are prompting that behavior to occur, and there are consequences that are keeping that behavior to occur. And then there's a competing desired behavior. There's a behavior that you want them to do instead. And that behavior has antecedents, and that behavior has consequences. When you look at the desired behavior and the undesired behavior, the behavior with the strongest antecedents and the strongest consequences wins. And all OBM is really identifying those antecedents and consequences and, crossing them off, getting rid of some of the antecedents for the undesired behavior, adding some antecedents for the desired behavior, getting rid of some of the positive consequences for the undesired behavior, adding some positive consequences for the desired behavior. And that's OBM in a nutshell, as you're trying to tip that balance of variables from the undesired behavior to desired behavior. So identifying those at any given time with your staff and kind of appreciating that balance so you can start tipping the scale a little bit. I would recommend, starting there. So.
All right, cool. All right, Lisa, thanks for writing in, and best of luck in the school year. So that's it for our listener questions. Nick, final question: what advice would you give to a newly minted BCBA?
I think the advice I would give them is to get involved. Get involved with their local behavior analytic organizations. Get involved with their consumer base. Read up on the consumer base. Start engaging in activities with your consumer base to understand them, understand your clients, understand their needs. Get involved with understand the regulatory restrictions in your area. When Matt and I were going to school, it wasn't emphasized as much. Now we have 30 and growing states with licensure and behavior analysis, and it's critical that whether you're an OBM person or you're a clinical person, it's critical that you stay up to date on those things, because that is there to protect your right to practice. So I would encourage you to get involved, network with a bunch of groups, and keep apprised of the needs of your consumers.
All right. Wise words to end on, Nick. These 90 minutes just literally flew by. So this has been a fun and informative conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and teaching us about some of the lessons that you've learned over the years. And best of luck finishing your book. And when is it going to come out again?
In January.
In January
2019.
All right, cool. We'll definitely let us know when that happens. We'll be sure to share the details on that when that happens.
Well, thanks again. I really appreciate your having me, and good luck on your book as well. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
All right, cool. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.